Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Heritage Board meeting, August 26th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Do we have any declaration of conflicts today? Seeing none, can I have an approval of the agenda? Moved by Councillor Beck, seconded by Councillor McCabe. All those in favor?
No, Madam Chair, just wanted to add something.
Yes.
Under new business,
Yes.
just want to give a notice of motion regarding the presentation at the Prince Edward Island Heritage and Museum Foundation, Black Islanders History, the Bog Tours. There is the Samuel Martins family, who was the founder of the Bog neighborhood, starting back in 1812, and I'd like to just put that out to our Heritage Department if we can get some information and come back with a plan for celebrating his contribution, his family's contribution to the Bog and to the city of Charlottetown. And there's others that would be involved, like Anne Maxwell, Linda Hennessy. They're all part of the group that was there to celebrate the inauguration of Black Islanders history. And the second item is something I spoke to Sharon Larder about, who is a former Parks Canada employee. We have Ravenwood out there at Experimental Farm. It's a historic property of, 200 years old? And I think the city has to start something with the Department of Agriculture, federal government, on what's their plan for that whole property, including Ravenwood, because it's just slowly being demolished through neglect. And I think that this is the time to hopefully get something moving. And I don't know where that would go through Donna or David or even the Director of Integrated Growth, Michael Russ, but I'd just like to give notice on both of those items. Thank you.
Great, I appreciate that, Your Worship, and staff will take that under advisement and flow it through the appropriate department areas and then through the appropriate committees. Thank you very much. Okay, now, approval of the agenda. Oh, we did that, sorry. Adoption of the minutes from April the 29th. Moved by Councillor McCabe. Seconded. Okay, thank you. Business arising from minutes, Your Worship. No. Oh, yeah, that was seconded by Sharon, by the way. Yep, sorry about that. Yep, and so we have one item on our agenda today under our reports and discussions, and it's 10 Prince Street, PID 336321, and it's discussions regarding potential heritage designation. And I'm sure you all had a chance to read the report. It's kudos to Todd. It's a really, really detailed report, and I thank her for that. So I'm going to turn it over for her to touch on some of the items that we may need to be aware of. Thank you.
So thanks. So 10 Prince Street is on the corner of Prince and Water Streets in the downtown mixed-use neighborhood zone of the 500 lot area. The building was occupied as a single-family residence until at least the 1950s, but from 1976 to present has been occupied by various commercial businesses. It's a simple Victorian-style building with a gable L configuration that supports both streetscapes and the heritage character of the area. Records do not reveal the exact age of the house, but its style is consistent with that of a typical home built around 1900. The city has received an application for development of the site, which will be reviewed under the zoning and development bylaw, which has special provisions for development in the 500 lot area. In addition, the proposal would be subject to the design review process. The proposed development would necessitate the demolition or removal of the existing building. This building is not a designated heritage resource and is therefore not protected under the Heritage Preservation Bylaw. Okay. As stated in the official plan, The ability to demolish properties in the 500 lot area is dependent on an assessment of the property's heritage attributes. This assessment was discussed by Heritage Board a year ago in August and September 2023, where Heritage Board recommended to Council that a temporary designation be placed on the property. This was supported by City Council at their meeting in October, and a temporary designation was imposed on the property, which expired 45 days later in November. Following an independent heritage assessment report in November 2023, Heritage Board made a recommendation to City Council for permanent designation of the property. This recommendation was reviewed by Council on November 27th, when it was deferred. An email and a following letter from the owner's legal counsel requested that the designation be denied. The owner's legal counsel alleged inappropriate consideration of potential new development, procedural failures under the bylaw, and the property not appropriate for designation. Council moved to defer the application to seek a legal opinion on whether there would be consequences for the city if they determined the property should be designated, given the owner's objection. In November 2023, the owner's legal counsel forwarded another letter wherein she suggests that due to procedural errors, the city must cancel the process to designate the property as a heritage resource. Legal counsel for the city reviewed the file and is of the opinion the property owner's counsel's position on the city's alleged errors were incorrect. With respect to the possible consequences for the city if council was to designate the property as a heritage resource, a review of the law on constructive appropriation concluded the risk to the city to be relatively low. As a result, the city's legal counsel disagreed with the conclusion of the property owner's legal counsel's correspondence and is of the opinion that the city had conducted the review process in substantial compliance with the bylaw. They further indicate it's possible IRAC or a judge on judicial review could find one or more of the alleged procedural deficiencies cited to have merit, but it's not probable. Heritage Board was made aware of the city's legal opinion in March 2024. This item returned to Council in April, where Council passed a resolution to consider the permanent designation of 10 Prince Street and proceed with a notice of intention to designate. On May 31st, the owner provided written submissions to the city via their legal counsel, which the city's legal counsel has again reviewed. As outlined in the report, the owner's legal counsel has identified 16 ways in which it alleged the city failed to meet its duty of fairness. Legal counsel for the city refers to their opinion of February 2024 to counteract these claims. The owner's position relies heavily on the case of Dalhousie versus Halifax Regional Municipality, which differs from the current case under discussion in several ways, including the HRM legal framework did not include an ability to temporarily designate the property without notice, as well as initiating the designation process after a demolition permit had been issued, thereby disentitling the owner for something already granted. Further, the owner has submitted comments which detail his strong objection to the heritage designation. He states, this property was purchased to build a home for his family with 4 children. The existing one-bedroom design is not suitable. His proposed design involves demolishing and restructuring the property to better suit the family's living needs and will include using a portion of the lower level as a commercial space for their business endeavors while renting out the remainder. It may be noted that when purchased in 2014, the bylaw at that time included a heritage area in which 10 Prince Street was located. Regulations associated with the heritage area at that time also required approval of Heritage Board for alterations, including demolitions. The owner also alleges the current situation is financially unsustainable. With impending mortgage renewal and rising interest rates, a cap on rent increases, making it financially infeasible to do any other spending on reinvigorating the property as one-bedroom rental units. The owner has also submitted a quote for work to improve the property. The cost for the work listed totals in excess of $594,000. It may be noted that designation of a property does not require any work to be undertaken. Further, the designation refers to the exterior of a property only and does not impact any interior alterations. The building appears to be in reasonable condition, fits the scale of the area, it's simple in form, addresses the corner, and has a traditional gable end facade. It's not an elaborate architectural style of the period, but instead speaks to a simple single-family residence. The building exhibits some unique characteristics such as scallop shingle patterning at the course line and gable, a stained glass window, and a side veranda. So 10 Prince Street was deemed by an independent consultant to be an important and significant heritage resource whose demolition or removal would result in damage to the streetscape. It would create a gap in the streetscape, and the loss of this resource would damage the integrity and authenticity of the streetscape and the 500 lot area, reducing the historical prominence of the corner. With the ongoing transformation of the waterfront in the east end of the downtown, the corner of Prince Street and Water Street has gained significance. This intersection marks a transition from a faster-paced vehicular traffic on Water Street to a narrow and slower-moving section of Water Street to the west. Its location at a major pedestrian gateway into the downtown core further enhances its importance. 10 Prince Street provides a strong indication of the character of the Prince Street neighborhood. Having considered all written objections, Section 3.3.8 of the Heritage Bylaw provides Heritage Board with 3 options, which are to make a recommendation to Council to designate the heritage resource as described in the Notice of Intention to Designate, amend the Notice of Intention to Designate, or to cancel the intent to designate the heritage resource. The Planning and Heritage Department firmly recommends that Heritage Board recommend to Council that 10 Prince Street be designated as a heritage resource.
Thank you for your report, Todd. I'll just open it up to the board if anyone has any questions for Todd. I would mention that if anyone needs additional detail on our legal opinion, our lawyer is here and we can move into a closed session if more detail on the opinion is required. But I can open it up now to anyone that has any questions. What? No questions? Wow. Okay, go ahead, Emil.
So we make a recommendation to council, is that it? It has to go to council after us?
Yes, that's correct. So staff has firmly recommended that the Heritage Board recommend to Council that 10 Prince Street be designated as a heritage resource. So our job today is to send along a recommendation, either supporting staff's, or if it's differing, then the report will be reflective of that as well. Go ahead, Councillor McCabe.
I would just say that I think there's been a lot of work done on this file, and I think the report is pretty clear, so I'm going to put forward the motion that we accept staff's recommendation.
Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Tara. So the resolution is on the floor to accept staff's recommendation, to move it on to council with a recommendation to designate as a heritage resource.
Yep.
So any questions on the
Yep, I do.
resolution? Go ahead, Your Worship.
Through the chair to Todd. Todd, if I go to page 26 of the presentation, you have Brighter Community Planning and Consulting. Were they hired by us?
They were.
They were. And have you done this in the past, where we reached outside of our own heritage department to get a third opinion, a second opinion?
Not that I know of, no.
And if I go to page 37, the recommendation is quite clear. Positive recommendation to designate 10 Prince Street as a heritage resource. Okay, so if we go back, was it 214, Don, that, or Todd, that you mentioned about, yeah.
Right.
So when did the city designate the 500 lots? Was that in that 210, 214 period?
It was in 2013. However, prior to that, as an addition to the 1979 bylaw, that we still had a heritage area that included this property.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
So by that designation, that 500 lot, that really placed a blanket over the 500 lots to say, properties that could be, should be designated are in line or could be in the queue like today. Is that valid to say?
Possibly. I don't think it was ever explicitly said like that, but it was certainly defined as a heritage area.
Yeah, I know, being at I attended some of the Charlottetown Downtown Association meetings, and some developers were there talking about how this blanket 500 lot designation was going to impact development, new development, but that doesn't happen, because you see in Old Quebec, the mix of old and new. That to me was just I think just a shot across the bow to sort of instill fear. So again, the 500 lots, you got a second opinion from a group out of a consulting firm out of Windsor, Nova Scotia. We've been dealing with this now for since last year. Go to council, defer, back here, discuss it again, do more writing. I'm supporting the resolution because if you look at the Atlas photo that is part of this package, and I don't know if you, Jason, if you have it there, it goes back to 1879, and I have it in the office of the mayor. And it's quite clear that there's an image of a building right on the corner of Water and Prince. So either that was something that was there and modified. That goes back to 1879. Am I correct to say that, Todd?
Not completely. That we actually think that is a previous building. It doesn't quite have the same footprint as this one. So we think this one is post 18. Is it?
1879 is this Atlas?
1878, is it? But it is pre-19. The insurance maps are updated to 1917, so it's pre-1917.
Yeah.
More likely
Yeah.
pre-1903.
Yeah, it's over 100 years old.
Yep.
So it's a heritage building, yeah. Anyways, I'm supporting the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The applicant's lawyer is here, and I do invite you, if you wish to speak to the board, you are more than welcome to come up and take a mic and speak if you like. And if you could just state your name just for the public record, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Margaret Ann Walsh of Stuart McKelvey, and I'm here on behalf of the property owner. And I think I'd first like to start by just pausing to highlight what almost just happened here. You almost, to my knowledge, for the first time, unilaterally designated a private property as a heritage use designation without weighing any input from the property owner. And I have material, I've written submissions that are now on the record. But if you go through those, the case law is clear that this is such an egregious interference with the property owner's rights that process matters. And the opinion from the owner matters. And that has not sufficiently been considered throughout this 2-year process. So I'll start by sharing some context with who the owner is and why this property is important to them. And I present this in the light of the case law that we have summarized in our last submissions, which is a case which is strikingly similar to the facts here, whereby Halifax Regional HRM unilaterally designated a property, and the court very significantly overturned that designation because it had not considered the owner's perspective. So the owner is Sabrahal Holdings, and that is a holding company which is owned by Dr. Vivek Sabrahal and his wife. Dr. Sabrahal is an anesthesiologist. He works primarily in internal medicine and critical care. His wife is an addiction psychiatrist. They want to move to PEI with their 4 children and occupy this property as their family home. He purchased the property in 2014, and before closing, like any other diligent purchaser, he submitted a zoning inquiry to see if there were any limitations on what he could do with this property. The report came back clear. It was clearly in the heritage area, so he knew that he would have to deal with the Lot 500 standards and design review and whatever was in place at that time, but the property was not designated as a heritage resource. Starting around 2021, he approached the city and started the process to determine what would be needed for him to develop the property. He hired a contractor, Noel Doucette, who attended here many times and met with planning department staff to discuss development plans. He hired a drafter at their instruction who worked up a set of drawings. He came back and presented those to the city. The city then said, you need to go and hire an architect because we need to further develop this and we need more detailed plans and a professional has to help you with this development. So we hired Sable Arc Studios, again, at the city's instruction. At no point did the planning department tell the owner, his contractor, or the architect that the property was historically significant. It didn't tell them that it was on any maps. There may or may not have been on maps from the 1800s. It didn't tell them of the prominent location or the importance of the scallop shingles. It said, planning department said, go ahead, hire the architect, and come back to us when you're ready to proceed. When he was ready to proceed, things were full steam ahead. He'd spent $30,000 now in professional fees, and he went back. This was last August, and he was, in deep with his architect, finalizing the plans and ready to put them before the Lot 500 and start the design review process to figure out what would fit in the scale and look of this part of the city. Staff at Sable Arc Studios was searching the Heritage Board minutes and came across a proposal to temporarily designate this property. No one notified the owner. It was only by chance that the owner learned of this process, which was by then well underway. Some of the materials you see today were included in that initial report, and no one to that point even raised any issues with the owner or said, wait a second, hit the brakes, there might be a problem here. So he learned of it in late August 2023. He was only formally notified on the temporary designation went into effect October 10th. 5 weeks later, the planning department gave him actual notice and told him he had 2.5 days to provide objections. He did the best he could and presented materials, but by that point, the decision had been made by the planning department to start this process without his input. In our letter of November 23rd, that's where we set out our first set of objections, and again, they're procedural. The opinion came back from the city's lawyer, well, it was substantively procedural and it was basically good enough. In our view, when you are going to have such a significant impact on an owner's rights, good enough is not good enough. It has to be exact, it has to be to the point. The owner was never served any notice. There was posted on the website and circulated around, but I would argue that 2.5 days notice to provide substantive written submissions of why his property rights should not be entirely negated is not sufficient or not good enough. In any event, the 45-day temporary designation went on and it then expired, so it's a moot point, only to highlight that the owner's rights have really not been respected since the very beginning of this process. We're here today a second time where the planning department is trying to go ahead with its intention to designate. And our formal objections are set out in our last letter, and they are lengthy and they are detailed. And to this point, I have not heard anything been raised by the planning department where any weight is given to these objections. The overarching theme of our objections is that the planning department has continued what I would say this quest to designate this property without considering the significant negative impacts that this will have on the property owner. It's effectively, unilaterally designating this property will expropriate the property from him. He won't be able to develop it. He won't be able to sell it. He'll suffer serious financial losses. So those really have to be considered by the board in making this decision today. In our last correspondence, we again highlighted that case I referred to previously of Dalhousie versus HRM. In that case, HRM unilaterally designated a property. Just like with 10 Prince Street, staff prepared reports on historical significance, considered objections from the public. Here, those are on the record. Public objections were considered before the property owner's actual objections. Heritage awards were considered again before the owner's rights. And just like 10 Prince Street, the HRM only learned coincidentally of the city's intentions to defeat the property's owner's rights. In that case, HRM's unilateral designation was overturned because it had not seriously considered the purpose for which the owner acquired the property, the owner's proposed use of the property, the vitality of the building itself. Like there, the building was in a serious state of disrepair. I mean, we all know what 10 Prince looks like, and if you drive down Water, you can see the garage is falling in, and the north side of the building is, it needs a lot of work. So all of these factors have to be considered in addition to the historical significance. But the materials which have been presented, although they're very fulsome, they only look at the historic significance. They haven't considered all these other factors, like what it will cost to maintain this property, or the fact that you can't put enough money into it to recover what you get out of it. So the end result will be a property that's going to be in a state of disrepair that can't be sold and can't be approved, so it'll just sit there and fail for years to come. Just like with 10 Prince Street, the HRM Planning Department made a recommendation to council to designate the property without considering the owner's input. And the court in that case described this as clear evidence of close-mindedness and said that council's views were therefore colored by one-sided submissions from the planning department because the owner had not been considered. So with respect, we submit that Dr. Sabrahal's objections have likewise not been properly weighed throughout this process. In fact, the planning board's report today has confirmed that his objections have not been weighed, and it went ahead and made the recommendation to this board regardless. I am not an expert in historical properties or, the kind of reports that are with the materials, but I would just highlight that there were two, I think, internal historical assessment had the property at 62, and the external one had it at 68. I would warn the board to go ahead with unilaterally designating a property for the first time in council's history on a relatively low score of 68 when you're weighing the two factors of what impact this will have on the owner and the property, and the process has been followed to this point. Is it worth it for a 68? Is this property that special? Water Prince restaurant is right across the street, and that's not a historic resource property, and that's a spectacular building that I would say, is noteworthy or certainly worthy of considering a historical designation. At a personal level, Dr. Sabrahal he wants me to communicate that he has been deeply, deeply impacted by the negative news articles in the press. They've portrayed him and his family in a bad light. He says that he has, throughout this process, he has had good intentions. He's done everything that he was told to by the planning department, and it went ahead and, in putting that temporary designation on the property and posting it to the public without notice to him, he didn't have a chance to prepare his tenants or deal with the reaction that would come from the media articles which were circulated. If he had been given notice, he could have communicated and kind of managed the situation better, but he should have had notice, and he did not, so he was left really flat-footed. Dr. Sabrahal says that his experience has caused him a tremendous amount of pain and suffering. He feels this would not have happened to him if he wasn't an immigrant living in the southern U.S. As a result of the negative media articles and the uncertainty about the property, he has been unable to find short-term or long-term tenants, and he's operating at substantial losses each month. On behalf of Dr. Sabrahal, based on the one-sided materials that have been presented by the planning board, and its continued lack of consideration for Dr. Sabrahal as the owner of the property, we would ask the Heritage Board to deny the recommendation to designate the property.
Thank you very much for your report to the board. Does anyone have any questions? I think that because we've allowed these folks to speak, I do think that it's appropriate that the board, if they have questions for either city staff or city solicitor or the person here representing the applicant, if anyone has any questions at all, I think that we can open the floor to those. Councillor McCabe?
Thanks. And I appreciate hearing that perspective for sure. Your letter that was included in the report, of course. So I feel that I'm sure best practice would be that we have had an opportunity to review the concerns at the department or with our legal. So maybe it would be nice to just hear a different perspective of that. Or for me, I feel that it is going to be one of those situations, perspective on the property owner, perspective from our staff and our own legal. And I was push-pull for a long time trying to determine what the best thing to do is. And I feel confident still continuing to support staff recommendation based on the information that I've received to date. So if someone, we did consult. I guess I'm looking for, we've consulted with our legal around this and they're comfortable and confident with the recommendation. Can someone confirm that for me?
I'll just defer that over to, probably to Donna to respond to that. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Councillor McCabe. Yes, we did confirm with our legal representatives and we did get a legal opinion back and they are okay with our recommendation as stated here today.
Which brings me to that, sometimes we get into those situations and there's other courses that are bigger than me to deal with the outcome of the results, but I'm still confident with moving the recommendation.
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Your Worship.
So, Madam Chair, I just want to make clear, the only person I've ever communicated, I think, was Robert. Robert Haggis is the architect on this project. I've spoken to him a couple of times. Dr. Vivek, I never knew who owned the property. So I have no negative view or contrary view of who he is. I just didn't know. This is the first time I know who the owner is. But we've been dealing with this, Margaret, for the last year plus. I assume that you and Dr. Vivek reached out to our department to lay out your claims. And you're saying that you didn't get anything back? Is that what you're telling us?
Not in response to the points that we've made. There's been no evidence, or they haven't looked for any information from us of what is the vitality of this building? Why did he buy it? What does he propose to do with it? And it was just concerning because the historic designation process only started after they saw the initial development plans. And then all of a sudden, it seems that they rushed to put this temporary designation in place. But even when they initially did it, they said they didn't like the look and feel and design of the proposed plan. Well, that's not something that you can consider when you're putting a historic designation in place. It's not the future development on that site. It's what's currently there. And in their initial reports that started this process, it was the concern with the proposed building that would go on there. And then they started this process to designate it to prevent the development.
Right. So this has been going on a year plus, 15 months, let's say. We've had public meetings. You've been aware of those public meetings. I'm sure Dr. Vivek has been aware of those meetings. Just like what the chair did today, she invited you, that's her call as chair, to come up and speak to the issue. I am sure the chair would have done the same if Dr. Vivek or any of his family showed up to speak to, they bought a property, now they're being told it's going to be designated as an historic historic property. And you have to remember, Margaret, is that Charlottetown is an historic city. It was established in 1765 as part of Samuel Holland's survey. And then go fast forward to 1855 when we received our charter as a city. But we have to look at that historic significance. And that's what I'm putting into this when I plan to make my decisions.
So are you saying that any property in Charlottetown could be unilaterally designated at any point in time with such little input from the owner? Like, this is a very slippery slope here, if,
Yeah.
you know, it just,
That's why I talked about the 500 lot designation. So there's a blanket over the 500 lots.
Certainly.
You're quite familiar with the 500 lots. It's south of Houston to the
Certainly.
water, bounded by Victoria Park and Esher Street. That's the 500 lots.
Certainly.
So I grew up in the 500 lots. Our home is designated as a heritage property. So are many others. The point is that there were lots of opportunities. It's been going on for a year and a half that you and your client could have come to this board to say, put the brakes on.
we have, I'm the same as Dr. Seberhal. I have done everything at every opportunity to speak to people that I could, but it seems that no one was interested in listening, to be quite honest. We kept raising these issues. Like, look back a year ago, I have my first substantive objections, and no one reached out or communicated or said, what does he want to do, or why did he buy the property? All the things that you're supposed to ask the owner to get their input, no one has ever invited him to the table.
But you did send a letter to our staff, and our legal counsel responded, citing that case in HRM. They did respond. That's part of our package. So that was a response.
I said it. That was my case.
So, but did legal counsel, Todd, can I go through the chair to Todd or Donna? Did we respond through Melanie or someone through Cox Palmer on that issue? That's in my package.
Go ahead, Donna.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through to your worship. So when council made the decision to defer their approval or rejection to the intent to designate originally, we did seek legal opinion from our legal counsel, and they did review the case law that the owner's legal counsel referred to, and they came back stating, as I had stated before, that we were within our procedural rights and also given what our bylaw states to proceed as we've proceeded. So we did seek legal opinion, and we did get back a response that supports our recommendation today.
So,
There was never any response
So, Madam
to
Chair,
me.
page 9, since making its recommendation, I believe September 25th, 2023, this is in reference to Margaret's letter, correct? If we go to the document that's in our package, and then we have a response from our lawyer, I believe Melanie McKenna, correct? So, like, there is a legal opinion from Margaret Walsh going to our city staff, and we responded. That's part of her package.
No.
You didn't get it?
I never received a response, no. I received one response from Ms. McKenna in respect of the temporary designation process, but that expired. It's moot. It's of no force and effect, because after 45 days, it expired. But no, there has not been any response to the proposed designation, the owner's objections to the proposed designation.
Donna, are you able to respond to that?
So the letter that the owner's legal representative is referring to, in fact, was what prompted us to get the legal opinion. And we asked our legal representatives, and Melanie was the one who replied to that correspondence that was sent originally to the city. So we did provide a response. In terms of the one that came recently after we put the intent to designate out, this would be the forum that we would bring that objection to lay it out so that the board can be aware of the owner's objection and then make a decision.
But to clarify, there was no response to the owner's objections to the owner. we're here right now. These are our objections, and again, I would argue that there still hasn't been any response to the owner's objections.
So as I had stated before, after getting the objections, this would be the forum that we would take those objections to reveal those to the board. And then going forward, if the board then recommends to council that the property be designated, and then we would then send something to the owner. So that's the process that the bylaw outlines.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, so, so your response is in our package, but I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you're a bit perplexed that there wasn't more focus on the objection. Instead, we're reading our report with our legal opinion stating that, yes, we hear the objections, but we still firmly recommend that we proceed with a heritage designation. Am I hearing that correctly from city staff and representatives?
Yes, Madam Chair, you're correct.
And if I might just add one thing.
Yes, go ahead, Margaret.
Please take the time to review my submissions on the Dalhousie versus HRM decision, because it speaks to evidence of closed-mindedness in the Heritage Board making a recommendation to unilaterally designate without considering an owner's objections. And it seems like that's what's going to be happening here. And that is, in the case law, as clear evidence of closed-mindedness.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you for coming and explaining the owner's concerns. I'm a little offended because you did mention that we made our decision possibly on race, or none of us knew. In this board, I'm a volunteer. I had no idea in the world who owned that building. The first time I saw a plan for the building was in this first meeting, and that building was so unsimilar to what's there now. It was not at all sympathetic to the original building. So for one thing, for somebody who takes old buildings and breathes life back into them, that building is a perfectly good building that you said he couldn't sell it and get his money back for it. I disagree. There are people who love heritage buildings. He will definitely get his money back if he does not want to do, or we don't agree with his plan. He can extend the size, possibly. He could request to extend the size. There's a good back lot there. He can do whatever he wants inside. So I'm just a little perturbed that you would call us closed mind, because we've all been brought here because of our love of heritage and our love of seeing Charlottetown protected as much as we can. So when you tell me I'm closed mind and that I'm bigoted, I'm taking that as a personal offense. I would like you to recount that, and please take that back.
Oh,
That is not me. This is trying to keep a beautiful building in Charlottetown intact and I'm sorry your person isn't happy, but we will be all very unhappy, and the city included, all the residents, if that building goes. So that's just as a volunteer to this committee, that is my sentiment.
And please, I did not intend to say either of those things. It was just in the case law, that's what it speaks to when you're not weighing the owner's vitality of the building and the owner's wishes for the building and the owner's input at the table when you're considering the historical factors. When you've made up your mind before weighing those, that's in the case law, that's what they refer to as evidence of closed mind, and not weighing all the factors that have to be considered. And the other comments were just from my client who says that because he's not from PEI, that, and this is the first time that the city has ever taken steps to unilaterally designate a property. He's kind of saying, why me and why now? And so I just wanted to communicate those, but they were not meant to be offensive whatsoever.
Thank you for that clarification. And just so everyone understands the role of this Heritage Board, we depend heavily on the professional staff to do the due diligence and do the research, get the legal opinions. That's what they're trained to do. So when we read a report and it's giving a firm recommendation, then we do have to look at that, you know, and definitely with our eyes wide open and looking and being grateful that we have a professional team that does that work, because we are not professionals. We're here looking at recommendations and reading reading the reports based on that. So this is what this volunteer board is all about, and it's a very diverse group of people that come from varying backgrounds with heritage expertise. So I just wanted to put that out there, and if I think Laurel, you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of points I wanted to note. There was a couple points in Ms. Walsh's submission that the architect, when he met with the planning staff, was not advised anything of the heritage character of the building. I personally was the planner that met with Robert Haggis, and when I seen the building, there was no back and forth until I received the plans. So they were emailed in to me, and then Robert came in to meet with me personally in the office to discuss the proposal. And when I seen it, I had concerns over the bulk and the scale of the mass of the building on the streetscape, because it's a very prominent street corner. So if you read the design guidelines for the 500 lot area and you read the official plan, it talks about addressing corners, and it talks about designing buildings that are in scale to the existing architecture within the area it's to be located. I advised him that it would have to go through design review if this proposal was to go forward, and that I had concerns over the size and the scale of the building. And that he also should meet with our heritage officer, Todd, because it's in the 500 lot area, and we just don't carte blanche sign demolition permits for buildings within the 500 lot area. So he was made aware of the fact that it would have to go to our heritage officer and possibly heritage board for a review prior to us taking it through to design review. So that was made well known to the architect. And I remember the last time we were before the board, Robert was here, and we had that discussion back and forth before the board. So he is quite aware of my comments on that, because I've also made those comments in front of you all with him present. The other thing I want to make mention of, in 2014, when the applicant states that he had a zoning inquiry completed through the planning department. At that time, the 500 lot area had just been adopted, and the plan explicitly said at that time that it was a heritage area, so there was no given that we would at any point in time allow that building to be demolished. Even though it was not a designated building, it still had to go through the process of review in 2014 to determine if it could be demolished. So to say that he bought the building with the intention that he would be able to demolish it is false, whether he interpreted it that way or not, but it should have been up to his legal counsel to properly advise him, because the zoning inquiry did indicate that it was within the 500 lot area, which was a heritage area at that time. Do you have anything to add, Todd? Thank you.
If I can just respond.
Do you want to follow up with Laurel's comments before Margaret speaks? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to point out that we did go into the objection that was sent by the owner and the legal representative, and that's outlined on page 3, starting at page 3, ending on page 5, where Todd went to a number of the items that the owner stated in their objection, and she spoke to that in giving her report.
Thank you. Margaret, did you want to follow up with that?
Sure.
Okay.
I think Ms. Laurel's Palmer-Thompson's comments really highlight the issue at the outset, is that the heritage designation is being used as a weapon to defeat the development, that you didn't like the look of the building perhaps, and then it seemed that quietly behind the then the designation process started when you saw the first development plans. And of course, I would argue that that's what the design review process is for, to go figure out what will fit in the look and scale and the right feel for the design to be built. But what's to be built is not a relative factor when you're deciding whether or not to designate an existing historical building. Those are two different planets. You look at future development design review, current development. You have to consider the historical factors, the owner's use, the other elements, what's actually on the ground right now, in deciding whether or not you are going to designate this property, existing property, as a heritage resource, not what could be built in the future. And that seemed to trigger this concerning that as soon as you saw the plan, didn't like that, and all of a sudden the designation process started.
Thank you, Margaret. Laurel?
Yes, Madam Chair. I believe Ms. Walsh is not understanding the process when we have a development application that comes into us. First of all, I should state there was no application that came in for design review or for construction of the building. It was a conversation that Robert Haggis came into my office to just bounce the plans off of me. And at that time, I told him that I felt personally as a planner that this was out of context and out of scale for the corner where he was going to locate it. And I said, if it proceeds, it would have to go through design review. But before we can take it to design review, you need to speak to our heritage officer, Todd, because it's in the 500 lot area, and we have to determine if that building would be allowed to be demolished, because the policy in the official plan and the bylaw talks about demolition. So anything within the 500 lot area has to be reviewed before we can give an okay to demolish it. So before we could even send it to a design reviewer, if we had an application that came in, it would have to go through this process first. And that was the conversation.
Thank you very much for that. Margaret, you have your light back on?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just got, has it ever happened before where when you were at that stage that you saw the proposed development plan and you went back to talk to Todd, has it ever happened before where the recommendation came back to put a historical use designation on the property?
Yes, through the chair. All the time. Every time I have a proposal that comes in the 500 lot area, I always look at the proposal and speak to the heritage officer first. Sometimes there are concerns with the building, where it's located, its heritage value. Other times there aren't. Todd could explain that more, but we always go to heritage first before we demolish anything within the 500 lot area. Because there are buildings that, even though they aren't designated, they are significant.
Thank you for that. Does any board members have any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Beck.
Yeah, I want to kind of second what Sharon articulated over there. I too did take offense to that comment, Margaret Ann, I'll be honest with you. I think you know me well enough from our days back in previous times. But the other part about it too is that this is not, I think when we're dealing with the 500 lot area, there's always a heightened level of sensitivity around it. And there's always a heightened sensitivity of who's right and who's wrong. And I want to clarify and publicly state that when I look at these things, I give them extensive, serious deliberation. It's not a fly-by-night decision that's made. And ultimately, there's going to be those who will agree with whatever decision is rendered or agreed upon in this room, and there'll be those who will be against it and those who will be in favor of it. But ultimately, we have to make a decision. And I do want it made perfectly clear that this has been carefully thought out, I know by me, and I think everyone else who's been sitting in here on this table has given careful thought to what the ramifications are, not only for the city, but also for the individual himself too. And again, I did not know who that person was prior to today, and so I just want to made it perfectly clear here today that this is a significant. We've never done it before. I don't think. First time. So it's not taken lightly, and I want to just go on the record as saying that careful consideration and due diligence is being given to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll circle back. The resolution is still on the floor. So we are still speaking to the resolution. Did you want to? Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify again, speaking to the undue hardship, or the fact that we were closed-minded in our consideration. So you stated that he intends to inhabit this with his family as a single-family home. Not sure. And I think it brings in a larger conversation about what it means to designate a heritage property. I've sat on this board for a number of years now. We have approved many additions, renovations, changes to heritage designated structures. I don't think it is a death sentence to a property. I think, in fact, I think Sharon brings up the point, it can kind of bring in other opportunities. It is an interesting thought that I think the initial reaction is, I shouldn't designate it because it's a negative thing or it's going to tie my hands. I think the heritage designation was in a response to a demolition, not what's coming in the future. So I think that's part of the consideration that I personally took into it, and in the kind of evolution of this. I'm not going to comment on the legal proceedings. I have no expertise in that. And I think that it's just an interesting dialogue and discussion when these things happen about designation, you know, how to best use them, how to best preserve them. Are they of value? Are they not of value? And it's a very subjective thing. But I do think that it does bring up a larger conversation around the value of heritage designation, what it means. And I just wanted, that's one thing that came into mind for me is, it doesn't mean that it can't be used. It doesn't mean that it can't be expanded. It doesn't mean that it can't be renovated. We've approved many of those applications, so I'd just like to bring that to the table.
Thank you for that. So just to circle, do you have anything else? No. So just to circle back, the resolution is on the floor, and that resolution is to support staff's recommendation to firmly recommend that this property be designated, and that's the staff's recommendation. So the board is being asked whether or not they support staff's recommendation or not. Ultimately, this moves on to council, either with the same recommendation or with a board's recommendation. So the question is that
I just do.
Yep,
Second
go ahead.
time, Madam
Yep.
Chair. So, Madam Chair, you emphasize the fact that we have a strong staff. But if I look around this board, Tara Maloney has been on this Heritage Board for a number of years. Sharon Larder, who has worked with Parks Canada for 30 years, knows the significance and importance of heritage to our city and to the province as a whole. Ken McGuinness, who has taken heritage very seriously with his own home down on 6 Ambrose Street, And, you know, if you look at the Aaron Stafford and his work in the city of Charlottetown. So we have a lot of strong parts on this board, staff and resident members. And I think that we're looking at it through the scope of the process. The process has taken us to this point. There's a legal part to it. That legal will follow after decisions made by this recommendation to board, the recommendation from this board to council, and then if legal proceedings take place, that's not within our purview. That's outside of what we're doing today. But I do want to emphasize, Charlottetown is a diverse city. You can look around with our Filipinos, our Vietnamese, our Chinese, Indians, all the groups that make up this great city that we call Charlottetown. And I think that the makeup of this board is a clear representative of our appreciation of our diversity and our inclusionary way of doing business. So today is an example of us looking at a piece of property that's within the 500 zones, the 500 lot zone, and that's the lens I'm looking through. And so I will be supporting the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Any other questions? If not, we can, His Worship has called the question. So all those in favor of supporting staff's recommendation to firmly recommend to designate this property at 10 Prince? All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Okay, so that was unanimous. That will move on to council. Will that be at tomorrow evening's meeting, or will that be?
It is actually too late because we're past the 5 o'clock.
So we'll see this at the second Tuesday in September's meeting. And so if there's nothing else, we can move on to any new business. If not, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor McCabe, seconded by Tara Maloney. All those in favor? Okay, thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.